Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Redefine Parenting. I am your host, Veenu Keller, and I want to welcome you to Spanglish World Network and H.E.R Network on Zingo TV channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download both the Zingo TV app on respective app stores and iOS devices and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. The app is free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire Sticks, Roku, Roku Sticks, and all smart TVs 2016 and forward. Tonight, you guys are in for a treat. I've had many clients over the last, 2-3 years that constantly ask me, what are the best apps to get to protect my kids? How do I know what my kids are doing? How long should my kid be on the internet? What's too much screen time? Well, the wait is over because I have found this expert who I actually found through my kids' school years ago during COVID. We were just talking about it. It was during COVID that one of the parents bought into their program, Protect Young Eyes. And Chris McKenna is the founder of it. Chris, thank you so much for taking time to join me tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Veenu. I'm excited to be here tonight. This is going to be great.
Yes, it really is. It really is. So I just want to, let's go ahead and just dive in. So
Sure.
I think some of the biggest questions that I get on a daily basis. So I coach kids anywhere from 5 years old to, early 20s, 30s as kids, right? So parents call me and say, can you coach my kids? And one of the biggest issues they have is no one can figure out how much screen time is too much screen time. And I've Googled it. Some say 2 hours, some say this, some say that. But here's the fact. When our kids are at school, they are on screen time. Their smart boards is a screen.
Right.
It is screen time. So it's very difficult for kids to say, so, as we were just talking, how you have twins, I have twins. So my twins come home and I'm like, you know what? You've had enough screen time today. I'm going to limit it to just an hour. And they say, well, I have to do my Razz Kids, which is online. I have to do my Happy
Right.
Numbers online. My friends want to chat. Why can't I chat with my friends? And by the way, Mom, I'm on screen all day long at school and nobody tells me that. So how do we win that argument with our kids?
Yeah, the conversation, I think, needs to shift. It's not about quantity of time, rather quality of time. And I think we need to elevate our sort of assessment, right? Our analog brains, our Gen X, right? I don't know what generation, right? I'm not going to ask, but I'm a guy who grew up in the 80s, and right, we would often be asked by parents, how much have you watched TV today, right? And so there's always been this sort of number of hours or minutes. We quantified it. But now that technology has woven itself into so many of the things that we do naturally, it's a different question. It's not how much, but what kinds. Almost the way that we assess food, right? In terms of junk food or healthy food. I think we now have to look at screen time in terms of, well, is it the junk food kind or the more nutritious kind? Other ways that I've heard it described is there's a type of screen time that your head is up and you're looking and you're in a classroom, you're on a smart board, you're engaged. Then there's a screen time where your head is down and you are blocking out the rest of the world, and it is just you and the pixels, and no other thing can disrupt that. And I think that's maybe another way to look at it. We want some balance there. Obviously, the former is a different type of interaction. Neurologically, you're still sort of engaged with the rest of the world, because even our TVs today are connected to the internet. Is watching Disney Plus count as screen time, right? So it's not apples to apples. We used to be able to say 10 years ago, well, what's the number? Because you really almost only use screens to do things that weren't totally productive in life. It was usually wasting time chatting or watching YouTube or something. But that was before screens started becoming a part of things that we also do that are good and healthy and normal for us. And so as parents, I think it's just a different conversation. I think it's more look at them, and if you can take a look at your child and more holistically say, okay, my kid is doing okay. What do I mean by that? Are homework done? Are they interacting with you when you want them to? Are they kind to their siblings? Is their room clean? Are all of the other things that you want them to be doing happening fairly well? If the answer to that question is yes, then chances are another hour of Super Smash Brothers on Saturday isn't going to hurt them, right? So I want to elevate the conversation from one that is tense, because I got to tell you, as a parent, it is stressful watching the clock for screen time. Nobody wants to do that. I'm the internet safety dad. I don't want to do that. So chances are no other parent watching this now or later wants to do it either. And I am giving all of you permission not to, because it is a stressful spot as a parent. It creates tension between us. And if all of our tech conversations with our children are full of consequence and negativity and yelling, then I just think we create a situation where nobody wins. And
Right.
so I want us to look differently. Now, I've said that, but here's just another real simple assessment that I give parents when I'm asked this question in parent talks. If every single time you take the screen away from your child, they turn into an ultra rage-filled version of themselves, then chances are they're getting too much screen time of all types, nutritious or not. Because to me, that's a sign that the screen is having an adverse effect on their beautiful, precious, young developing brain, that it's causing this response in their amygdala, that it's causing, all this anger and frustration and tension. And you don't want that for your kid either. So we could go on, but I guess I'm trying to reorient our assessment of that concept of screen time and elevate it a little bit to where I think is a healthier spot for families today, if that makes sense.
It does. And you brought up a couple points that I want to bring. So number one, I really liked how you said, let's not quantify it. Let's look at like the quality of what they're getting. Is their head down where they're shutting out the world? Or is their head up where they're seeing you and talking to you and engaging and being able to engage with their environment, that their sensory acuity is not tainted because their vision's up and aware? So I loved that. The other thing that I want to say, because I too grew up in the 80s, and you're right. It was TV time, too much TV time. You're sitting too close to the TV time, too close to the screen and whatnot. And, here's the deal. It's when I watch, you and I were just talking about that Childhood 2.0, the movie?
Yes, Childhood 2.0.
Okay.
Yeah,
Childhood 2.0. And I believe that documentary, it talked about, like, it actually showed these kids that when you took the screen away, they were having an absolute meltdown. And they said, you want to see if your kid's addicted, watch. And these kids were literally on these pads, and the parents took them away, and these kids melted down. They're like, that's addiction. And then the kids were coming and telling us, hey, I am addicted to this. I am addicted to my screen. These young kids were saying that, meaning that life cannot go on if I'm not on it. And it was interesting because as soon as I watched that show, I did an experiment. I was talking to my husband about it. I said, you know what? As of tomorrow, we're going on a digital vacation. Like, they're already on the screens at school. When they come home, we're going to have to interact without being on the screens. And, they could do their 15 minutes of RAS kids, 15 minutes of math, and then they're done. And I saw their attitude change. Now, my kids didn't have a meltdown. Like, there was no meltdown about it. They didn't understand. And I said, well, we're just going to do this experiment. We'll see how long it goes. It ended up going for 3 months. Wow. What I found in my twins is that their attitude changed. The way they spoke to us changed. The respect changed. It all improved. And then I was starting to notice is that they're watching a lot of stuff on YouTube, and they weren't watching bad stuff per se, but they were watching like a prankster, like this guy that does pranks everywhere. All the kids are watching this guy do pranks. And so all of a sudden I changed the rules. If you want to watch YouTube, it has to be a how-to video. How to build, how to fish, how to.
I love that. That's great.
If it's not a how-to, you're not allowed to watch YouTube in this house.
Yeah.
Like, it's a no. And then there was a fear because, again, watching that show, Childhood 2.0, I don't know if it's a fear or if it's an awareness. Let's call it awareness. I think awareness is better. Is that how much is coming through YouTube as commercials and stuff that us parents are not aware that our kids get a flash of, or the little X is so tiny the kids are trying to turn it off and it turns on. And now all of a sudden there's like a porno on or adult content on, sure, if you would. What do we do? How do we feel safe with knowing that our kids are safe on the internet?
Well, YouTube is a very unique one that you just touched on, that almost no matter what you put in place, there is content on YouTube that is probably going to be more mature than the type of content that you and I consumed when we were 11, 12, or 13 years old. As a general rule, we want all children sort of at Protect Young Eyes when we give advice. If a child is in elementary or middle school, YouTube should only be used in restricted mode. So we want parents to understand, just from a toggles and controls perspective, how to have restricted mode in place, because that's going to at least block most of the egregious content that's out there. And it's also going to turn off the comments underneath, where a lot of porn bots and other interactions can take place that are certainly too mature for children in elementary and junior high. So, right, that's one part of it. So, Veenu, when we talk to parents about digital spaces, one of the things we say is we help families, schools, and churches create safer digital spaces. And we often do that through a balance of both technical and relational solutions. And we want parents to look for opportunities in both. Technically, YouTube, for example, we want it in restricted mode. Relationally, we want to say to our young children as often as possible, you know what? There are going to be some things that, even with this technical solution in place, that may slip through. Here's the thing, honey. I want you to know that if you see that, you're never in trouble if you tell me about it.
Yes.
That's not your fault. In fact, that would be one of the phrases that I want every child to hear from their parents over and over and over again, is that when something happens on the internet, when the internet shows them something, whether it was them who clicked on it or not, I want them to hear beyond a shadow of a doubt, honey, that's probably not your fault. Because I want to right away get rid of that fear that they have that this thing called the internet, which was never designed for them in the first place, even with all the toggles and settings in place that we could do correctly. At the end of the day, very few of the digital spaces that we drop our children inside of, absent a tool like the Gab phone, for example, very few of them were actually designed with an 11-year-old in mind. Therefore,
Wow.
when an 11-year-old experiences things like that, we want to get rid of every obstacle possible for them to bring that to us so they can process that with us. So that would be the other relational half of YouTube, that I want kids to know that it is a spot that sometimes could show them things that makes them uncomfortable, right? Obey that little radar in your stomach. When something feels weird, then it probably is. Your superpower is your feelings. Like, use them, right? Come bring that to me. Because, Veenu, when I talk to elementary, like 4th and 5th graders, whole rooms of them at schools, I'll say, how many of you love YouTube? And of course, all their hands go up, right? They want to tell me all their favorite videos of what failed or what animal ran into what door, or whatever, that stuff, right? And then I'll say, I want you to put your hands down. Let's agree we all love YouTube. You see, all your teachers had their hands up too, right? And then I'll say, how many of you know that, or the phrasing is, how many of you have bumped into something that you know you probably shouldn't see on YouTube? Don't raise your hand, just kind of nod your head. And like a wave across the room, all the heads start to nod.
Wow.
And they're just kind of like, because I don't want there to be any shame. I just want there to be this sort of, you're not alone sort of moment. And then I look at the whole room and I'll say, everybody just look at me. That's not your fault.
Beautiful.
And if something bothers you that you see, please find someone you can tell. And then I ask them, who are some someones you could tell, so they can name them off. Oh, I could tell my older sister. Inevitably, they all say, I could tell my friend. I'm like, wait a minute. If it made your stomach feel upset, do you think it might make your stomach of your friend feel upset too? And they go, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't tell them. You're right. Who else could you tell? And when they can develop some of those tools themselves through that relational part of a tool like YouTube, there's a lot of power in that too. So
Yes. Yes. And I love that the questions that you ask them, because I'm all about quality questions. And I love that you give them that opportunity to say, well, if it kind of makes you feel weird, how's it going to make your friend? And they're like, oh, okay, who else can I tell? And one of the things that I always tell parents on my show, and my listeners who've heard me say this, I'm going to say it again because repetition's another skill, is our whole aspect of parenting is to create an open, safe, and trusting space where our children can feel they can communicate anything with us. Because if they can't trust us to be on their side, who are they going to go to trust?
yeah.
And especially right now with the internet, because, I heard you when you just said it was not made for kids. And I'm going to tell you, when the World Wide Web was talked about way back in the 80s. There's this thing going to be called the World Wide Web, and you're going to be able to talk to people in China and India, and you're going to be able to find out things in Germany and Iran. And I'm thinking, oh, really? Yeah, okay. And then you're going to be able to talk to people and see them. I'm like, this is not the Jetsons. How are we going to be able to see and talk to people? And here we are in 2023 with the World Wide Web, being able to look up stocks in India and in Germany and everything else. And we're able to use it as a tool, because here's what I want parents to understand. It's not all bad. There's so much goodness that comes out of the internet. And just like in life, we have things that are good and we have things that are not so good. And when we overindulge in something that's good, it starts to not be so good. So, even us, like I look at my screen time that I look on my phone, and I was like, oh gosh, I was on my screen a lot today. And especially when it's going to the social media stuff. And kids are watching us too as parents, right? They're watching us when they're like trying to have a conversation, like, hold on a second, and they're watching us scroll and everything.
Absolutely. We want our children to learn how to use technology through us, hopefully, right? We are excellent models, hopefully, in that way. Veenu, in many of the, we've had thousands of conversations like you with parents all over the world. And we've observed that most parents who have children who learn how to use technology in good, positive, honorable ways tend to do certain things persistently. And from that, we've developed a framework called the Digital Trust Framework. And it has 5 phrases in it: copy me, co-play, curiosity, conversation, and coaching. But that first one is copy me. Because when you look at the studies that are out there, whether it's from the World Health Organization or pediatric societies, they have different conclusions, but almost all of them have 3 things in common. Number one, they say that whatever screen time your children is getting right now, less is always better. Like there's no study that says if they play outside too much, that's going to be harmful to them other than a bee sting, right? They say no screen time under 2 years old, 0 sedentary screen time under 2. But the third thing they say, to play off of what you just said, is however the adults, the role models in their lives use technology has maybe one of the most important impacts on how they learn to use technology well. And there was a child therapist. She worked not like in emotional therapy, but through speech and reading therapy with 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. And this was during COVID. And she wrote an editorial for the USA Today, and she used a phrase that just really stuck with me. She says, I hypothesize that many of the delays that we're seeing, this is before, we were a year into COVID. This was sort of at the beginning of it. And she had already started to notice delays in some early childhood milestones when it came to reading and writing. And her hypothesis is that at least one of the contributing factors is adult screen time. And she equated it to the new secondhand smoke. In other words, when we are constantly with our children, but robbing them of face-to-face interaction, which is wildly important for early childhood development. It's not just peekaboo. It is actually teaching emotions and interaction and how to deal with looking at another face and interpreting what a smile means. There's so much going on in that game that seems so silly with your kiddos. And if we're constantly interrupting time with our kids, with our screens, her hypothesis is that we are actually robbing them of developmental opportunities with the one human on earth that means more to them emotionally, spiritually, relationally than any other human on earth, and that's their parent.
Right.
And I just think it's a fascinating hypothesis that she put out there just for us to consider. True or not, let's just all agree that fewer minutes on our screen as parents with our children is always a better thing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I also think it goes back to what you said, full circle to what you said, is that if their head is down, they're not being present with anything else. And same thing with us parents. If our head is down into our phone or whatever, we're not being present with what's going on around us. And, but it also brings me into this, is that, so I have a granddaughter who's almost 6. And I remember just even at an earlier age, like 2 or 3, if I'm shopping with, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter was with us and she was just having a rough day, that's okay, I'll just give her my phone. And she at 3 years old knew how to work mom's phone and find her shows on YouTube or Netflix or whatever it was. And I was like in awe. I was in absolute awe that at 3 years old, my granddaughter could do that. And what I'm finding out though is and you see it all the time when you're out shopping, when you're in restaurants, all these young kids that are not even, maybe preschool level, that are just glued to their iPads and their parents' phones. And it's almost like we've given them just, this is the new way that we live. This is the new permission. Because I don't know about you, but when I went to a store or a restaurant with my mom when I was younger, there was nothing. Like we were lucky to get a menu that we can color, back then,
Right,
something to do. You had conversation, you talked, you looked at what mom was buying, and there's a lot of lessons to learn when you go to the store, with your parents that kids are now missing out on.
Yeah, I'm noticing a great comment here from somebody who's watching us on Facebook who says we as parents have to model behavior. If we want kids to be present, we have to be present, right? So amen to that. Play on what you're talking about there. And I see that all the time. And let's just be honest, it's an easy fix. If a child is having a fit, to give a phone fixes the problem most of the time.
A Band-Aid.
But that's the problem. It fixes the problem. And now what you're creating inside of that young, precious, developing brain is a cycle of resolution to stress that is attached to a screen. And there's a lot of benefit to having other ways that we resolve the stress and tension in our lives, that we learn how to self-resolve, that children are okay to cry and to figure some things out without the help of a screen. If we're constantly medicating tension and difficulty and stress in their lives with a screen as a 3-year-old, then I tend to believe that that creates neural pathways in a child that when they're 10 or 13, we're actually tuning them that whenever they feel stress or whenever they feel like something is bad in life, they're going to be drawn to a screen instead of drawn to a relational solution, instead of drawn to going in my room and sort of pouting it out and figuring it out and processing through it and talking to myself and crying in my pillow or whatever it needs to be. These are all good and healthy things for our brain to process. If we do not give children the opportunity to process their emotions, we rob them of opportunities to create an emotional resilience that you and I both know is so necessary as adults in a world that is sometimes cruel. And screens are an easy way out, whether you're 4, 14, or 40. But I think as parents, we've just got to say, 3-year-old, cry it out. I know everyone's staring at me in the banana aisle. Okay, I get it. And you deal with it, just like you and I had to, as kids when we were growing up. So
yeah, I like what somebody else said on Facebook. One of the comments was self-soothing disappears. It does. So kids have a lack of learning that skill to self-soothe. They don't know how to get through it anymore. They're needing an external device to help them cope with whatever they're feeling in that moment. And I like to make that point. What you're saying is that, when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's being intelligent about our emotions. It's being aware of the emotions that we're feeling. What are they related to? What are they linked to? And how are they showing up in our body and how we're reacting to it? And when we're just giving a screen, like I was saying, it's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid for the moment, because when you take that tablet away, the problem still exists that they didn't clean their room. And the problem still exists that they still got to go clean their room. So what are you going to do with it now? Just keep giving them a tablet? Right. What is the solution? Right. So I really, really appreciate what you're saying. And, that obviously the viewers do too, because it is so spot on. It's spot on. And so at what age do you think going forward parents should introduce the screen? Because we already know they're going to be introduced at school. It's already a fact. They're using smart screens now at school. Most schools have iPads or computers the kids have to use. They have to do their reading on computers. They have to do their math on computers. From what I know, some kids don't even have textbooks anymore because everything's on computer. So what age is it okay do you think, in your opinion, again, we're not doctors or lawyers or anything here, but just in your opinion of what you've seen and what you've put together, what do you think is an appropriate age to introduce an iPad or a computer to a child?
Well, I think that it could happen quite young. I want to be, I guess, clear. Oh, all of my lights just disappeared. I don't know why.
We can still see you.
You can still see me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I don't know what's happening over here, but okay, there we go. Protect Young Eyes, we are a slow tech company, but not a no tech company, right? So right kids, right tech at the right time. In fact, I just posted this today, and I know people will be watching this on a day other than right now, but it was titled Ready, Set, Slow. Like, I
Mhm.
want kids to be ready to use technology. I want kids to, this is really strange. I want kids to be prepared for digital spaces because they're going to have friends who have certain technologies, right? They're going to be in places where there are digital doorways that we can't control. And so, what's the right age to introduce a child to a computer in the house? I mean, quite young, as long as it's used in public places, as long as they don't ever use it without you being there, without it having filters on it, right? I think a child at 4 or 5 could play ABC Mouse or have screen time or FaceTime with grandma on a iPad or whatever it might be. I think that's okay. I think the school question is a different question. I mean, there's a whole different set of study and theory and conversation and probably tense, conversations that we could have about educational technology and many schools racing towards devices long before there was research to suggest that that was beneficial to the educational process. That's a whole different monster that we could probably have a whole broadcast on all by itself. But I guess I don't want to create. And I'll also say, if there are some parents who go, nope, no tech for any of my kids until age 10. All right, that's okay. But my caution to that would be that even if you've said no, teach your kids about technology as if you've said yes. Why? Because unless you live in a commune, you do not control all of the digital doorways that your children are going to have access to.
100%.
And
100%.
and so I think there's a good balance there. That's why we say, delay is the way is kind of one of our hashtags we use at Protect Young Eyes. And delay is the way is not a no
I love
tech strategy, it's a slow tech strategy. And part of slow tech is right kid, right tech, right time, and just make sure that they still know certain things so they can be safe without you being there. That's the
right.
key.
So it's interesting because this really, like, I love our Facebook viewers today because someone said some schools even have kids look things up on their phones, making those that don't have one feel, further pressure. And it's so true. I remember, so I told you before we started this conversation, after I heard your talk with us parents at the school my kids go to,
Yeah.
and we talked about the Gab phone. I went ahead and got the kids the Gab phone literally that year, and they've had it for 2 years. And now they're like, but when are we going to get an iPhone? And I said, what do you need an iPhone for? And they're like, well, all my friends have iPhones. I mean, will you at least let me get an iPhone, maybe an Android? Okay, so what is an Android going to do for you? Well, all my friends have phones where they can get on the internet. I said, you have an iPad, like they don't have an iPad, they have a Samsung, and then they also have a MacBook. So they essentially can FaceTime. They can do everything they can on their MacBook
That's
that
right.
they can't do on their phone. So, but they still feel the pressure. They still feel the pressure because kids their age have iPhones. And I'm going to be honest, the only reason why I got my kids phones 2 years ago is my husband and I travel. So when they're with their grandparents or a friend of ours that are staying with them, they have a way to reach us at all times, so they always feel safe. And what I love about the Gab phone is there's a GPS on them. So
That's right.
when I'm home and they're riding their bikes down the road, I know exactly where my kid is at. So I definitely like the GPS on that. And that was it. So there was no more time that they need to be on their phone with their head down, like you were talking about, their heads constantly up because they're not putting any time into that. And that's why I got the Gab phone. But again, going back to our viewers' comment, there is a lot of pressure. So, what are you telling kids or parents, that I'm sure you get this question all the time? Like, what do we do when our kids are constantly telling us, like everyone else does, and we feel like we're left behind or we're not enough?
Well, I think there's some shared responsibility here. So we live in a time where, as parents, we often know less about the parents of our kids' friends
100%.
than when we grew up, right, Veenu?
Yes.
So I think there's a shared responsibility here. I think if you want to decide as a parent, and we are of the mindset that no child who isn't at least in high school needs to carry the internet with them. That's just what we believe at Protect Young Eyes. It is simply unnecessary to
I
carry the
agree.
World Wide Web in your pocket until you get past the middle school to high school transition. It's simply unnecessary. So that's, one of the things that we say. But, as a parent, it's up to us to know the parents of the kids that our child is hanging out with so that we can look at each other and have some agreements on some things, that when our children are together, we have a certain shared understanding as to how technology is going to be consumed, what kinds of devices are going to be available, so that we can say to some of those parents, you know what, my kid doesn't have that, they have this, and I'm concerned about this or that, right? Let me equate it this. When I was growing up, I lived in a fairly conservative, strict home, and we didn't have cable, right? I was the oldest of 7 children. We didn't have that luxury called, cable at that time, just basic channels. But my parents wanted to know if I was going to spend the night at somebody's house, did they have Showtime, Cinemax, or HBO? Because that would have been bad for me, right? Like those are the
Yeah.
types of things that were going to, take me off the path as a child, whatever it was. I joke about that with my mom today. And I think today we are still entitled to ask certain questions.
Yes.
So the 2023 version of Showtime, Cinemax, or HBO relates to devices, relates to filters, relates to routers. If my child is going to be spending time with other children, and that child has an iPhone, I want to know, does screen time, is screen time enabled on it? Are limited adult websites checked on it? Do they have Snapchat, right? Because do they have TikTok? I want to know these things. These are the new questions because these are the new doorways. And I would argue that these doorways have the opportunity to do 10 times more harm traumatically to my child than almost anything that I could have seen on Showtime, Cinemax, or HBO back in the middle of the late 80s, right? And so I just think we have to own some of that, I don't know, perceived awkwardness that we have, or that we feel as though, well, they're going to feel like I'm judging them. No, as a parent, I have a right to know if my kid can get to porn through your kid. That's kind
Right.
of my right as a parent. And I know I'm the internet safety guy, and every parent that I interact with kind of expects me to ask these kinds of questions. But I think every parent should feel confident in asking those kinds of questions so that we build some bridges of understanding, and we're not just putting it squarely in our kid to figure out how to interact with his friends who have all this tech and he doesn't.
Right. I
So,
really appreciate what you're saying. And, it's funny because that's one of the questions. Like when my daughter has friends or my son has friends that come over and spend the night, before they come over, I said, you have to understand when they're in our house, it's our rules. That means electronics are off by 8 o'clock. There is no and when I mean electronics, they can watch TV. So when you and I grew up, electronics was TV. Now electronics is TV, computers, iPads, like the whole gamut, phones. So in our house, the only thing that's allowed on past 8 o'clock is a TV. And I said, that means your friends' phones have to go away too. Like you're not going on it. Your friends have social media. It will not be turned on in my home. It's just not going to happen. We're not going to have social media in our home for you guys. Like it saddens me because now we're going into some deep conversations. A lot of my clients that are my sweet spots between like 12 and 16-year-olds, that's, really where I get a lot of these kids that have anxiety, low self-worth, low self-esteem. And here's one of the things that when I start coaching them and I can really dig deep into it, I say, what's your measurement tool? And they're like, well, I was on Instagram, or, this girl, I'm not really friends with her, but I saw her Snap story. And oh my gosh, if I could just look like that. And because everyone likes that and they don't like this. And it all comes back down to social media. And these kids, that if you ask the parents, like, my kid doesn't have social media. These kids have social media when we think they don't. They have social media. They're
yeah.
using their friends' social media as their social media. They're able to. This social media has created such an epidemic in these kids where the comparison, and when you compare, you steal joy. So these kids are constantly in a bubble of anxiety and depression because they cannot get away from it. And I'm talking elementary level. Like these kids are coming to school, with iPhone 14s when they're 8 years old. I don't even have an iPhone 4. I don't even have an iPhone 14 right now. But these kids are setting up accounts. The parents think that there's no harm. Can you please share what the harm is? Because you brought up that whole, if there's an opportunity for my kid to see porn, I have a right to know what the avenues are. And I agree with you, because that too has become a hot topic in my coaching lately. I'm getting a couple calls going, my 13-year-old's addicted to porn, my 14-year-old's addicted to porn, and the mom is crying her eyes out. And I'm like, well, let's just go through this and know that it's not your fault. And let's help your child to get unaddicted to this. And let's really understand what addiction is, first of all. But so I know I threw a lot there at you, so there's a lot to unpack, but I'm sure you have a lot to tell us about it all.
Yeah, that's an issue that is sometimes hard to talk about, but it's everywhere, right? In all the
Yes,
spaces. And that's what's so difficult today. When we were growing up, there were pretty bright lines, Veenu, between where porn was and where porn wasn't. You had
correct.
to be pretty intentional about getting to it. In fact, that was often the case, is you had to go to it. We
Mhm.
now live in a time where it comes to us, and it lives in all the spaces where we want kids to be doing other good things. So we have mixed content spaces where both porn and Chromebooks, and both porn and FaceTime, and both porn and homework, and both porn and PowerPoint image searches for what I need to do for school all live in the same place. And we repeatedly ask children with 13-year-old brains to not click on that thing. It's a pretty, you step back and you look at what kind of pressure we've put on children to consistently make good choices in technology. It's madness when you think about it, right? So again, I want to put that out there, because whenever possible, and I know you appreciate this, I want to level up our empathy for what it is to grow up today. It's
Yes.
not apples to apples. There's a
Thank
tremendous
you.
amount of pressure that, whether just separate even from pornography, there's a tremendous amount of pressure that exists if you're a young person living in a world where algorithms are constantly pursuing every minute of your conscious time and attention. That is a pressure-filled place to be in. When you said that back in the 80s, we first started learning of this thing called the World Wide Web, and we would learn about news in Germany or Iran, and I step back and go, you know what? We don't need to, right?
Right.
And we live in a time where we do now know all of the news about all of the things happening everywhere. And that is difficult as a 40-year-old to process and to sort
100%.
out, what should I care about, or what don't I really need to care about right now? And we expect 12, 13, and 14-year-olds to have the ability to sort out what they need to care about or not care about. Now let's talk about the issue of pornography, which according to many scientists is a super normal stimulus. When you look at the type of reactions that occur inside of a human brain when it's exposed to pornography, it lights up the human brain. Because whether you believe in creation or evolution, there's just something deep inside of us that craves that kind of sexual connection with another human being, right? And so pornography mimics that in a distorted, often inappropriate, often unrealistic way, so that the brain doesn't really know the difference between what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. The brain just cares about response to stimulus. And so the brain is going to crave the easiest path to an outcome. That's dopamine at its best. Dopamine isn't what I get when I see something, it's the promise that I might get something that I really, really want. And the brain is going to go after that thing as much as possible. And pornography promises that outcome of that kind of stimulation and that release of a whole complicated mix of neurochemicals that eventually will prefer pixels to people. And that's the real tragedy. There's a tragedy on a number of different levels when it comes to pornography. But one of the tragic outcomes when it comes to young people and where they are developmentally is it shows them a completely false view of what love and respect and intimacy is supposed to be like. And
Right.
we remind children and high schoolers all the time that, remind yourself, these are actors. You're watching a movie of things that do not actually happen in real life. If your frame of sex is what you're watching on your iPhone and you believe that's true, then you are going to be sadly disappointed in real life. And you're likely going to mistreat that other amazing human being that is with you, whatever stage of life you're in, because of the lie that you've believed. And so now here's our role as parents to interrupt that lie and to teach our children what good, loving, honest relationships are supposed to look like, because it just has such a devastating impact on that developing brain, where a young brain that is continually exposed to pornography is at great risk of really harmful behaviors, especially young children. And you know this from working with them. I have so many stories that I could tell. The one that I tell most recently comes from a conference that I was at last April, the National Catholic Educators Association, 3,000 educators. And I had the blessing of being a keynote speaker there. And I spoke about mental health technology in our kids. And about 20 minutes after my presentation, I had two different principals from two different Catholic schools come up and tell me the exact same thing within 20 minutes. They both told me that last week, at that point in time, the week before, they had expelled a fourth grade boy for the exact same reason. That in both of these schools, this fourth grade child in each school had been inappropriately touching his teacher repeatedly in class. And what they came to find out is that in both cases, both of these boys had been watching pornography at home. And therefore, that played out in what their behavior was, because of high quantities of mirror neurons in young people, which cause them to mimic us and to do things like little parrots and copy us. The things that children see, they need to do. And so when young people see porn, they want to practice porn, not because they're bad kids, but because neurologically they are compelled through gross motor to do the things that they see. And so these are the stories, right, that not only with teachers, but that we see the massive increase in peer on peer sexual abuse. Why? Because when young children, 100% of the cases of the Child Advocacy Center, when I talked to them 2 years ago, child advocacy centers are all over the country, right? Over 800 of them. They work with families who have children who have been abusing others or whose children have been abused. And in 100% of the cases of the local CAC here, of families of children who had been abusing another child, all of the children who had abused other children had been looking at pornography at home, right? So there's this deep neurological impact that goes on with that kind of stimulus in that stage of life that is really traumatizing to children.
So, with all this going on, how do we protect our young eyes? How do us parents, what do we do? Because we cannot follow our kids around 24/7. We are not on their devices 24/7. I could do the best that I can. Like I check their accounts, I check their messages,
Yeah.
I check who they friended. But what about the spam accounts that they make? Like, how do we make sure our kids are doing right with what they're supposed to be doing on the internet and not getting involved with what's not right, but yet they're feeling like that compelling, like, I got to do this because I need it. Like, so where, how do we do this?
I think the response depends on the age, and the age dictates that balance between technical and relational solutions. And here's what I mean by that. The younger the child, the more we depend on technical solutions in order to prevent this kind of harm.
Mhm.
Why? Because I don't want to have conversations with 6-year-olds after they've seen pornography. I simply don't want 6-year-olds to see pornography at all.
True.
Therefore, I wrap them, and we talk about 5 layers of digital protection at Protect Young Eyes: the relational layer, the Wi-Fi layer, the device layer, the location layer, and the app layer. And we do a whole 90-minute talk at schools, for parents who want more on that. But the younger the child, the more we wrap them in technical solutions, meaning we don't actually give them access to many digital places, that all of the technologies they have access to are own, like they're used in public places. They all have filters, right? They're all highly controlled technically. And we also pair that up with the relational side of our layers by saying to children, probably 2 years before you really want to, you know what, honey, if you ever saw naked people, if you ever see somebody's private parts, if you ever see anybody without their bathing suit on, if you ever see any of that on the internet, I just want you to know what you do. You put it down and you tell someone. Repeat
Mm,
after me. Put it down and tell someone. We do this exercise with elementary schools, all the ones that we
Love
talk
it.
to,
Put
right?
it down and tell someone. I love
Put it
it.
down and tell someone. And then we ask them, like I talked about earlier with YouTube, give me 5 someones that you could tell. And all the hands go up. We talk about grandmas and grandpas and, parents and teachers and others. Again, the friend will come up and I'll say, no, why not the friend? And then we correct that one to toward, other someones. And we repeat that phrase with our kids frequently. And then we practice, right? So I've talked about the technical, we say it relationally, and then we practice. Why? Because young brains don't think abstractly. They need tangible, right? And so to say to a 5 or 6-year-old, if you see something that isn't right, that makes you uncomfortable on the internet, I want you to come tell me. If that happens, and let's say you're in the room busy doing work, they're going to say to themselves, is it okay to interrupt mom right now? I don't know. Is this okay? And that little lying voice is going to say, don't tell them, you're going to get in trouble. Unless you've said, all right, honey, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put the Chromebook or I'm going to put the iPad in front of you, and I'm going to go into the other room and pretend that I'm working. And I want you to pretend that you've seen something you haven't, that isn't right. And I want you to come into the room. I want you to interrupt me. And I want you to say, Mom, I saw something that I shouldn't have seen. All right, let's do it. And you walk into the other room and you put the Chromebook in front of them and you say, okay, honey, go. And you say, put it down. And then you have them walk in and actually tell you. And then you get in the car and you say, now I'm going to make it that if it happens when I'm not home, no matter what is going on, as soon as I walk in the door, I want you to tell me. So you get in the car, you back out of the driveway, you come back in, you pretend to come inside and you say, okay, what do you do? Right? We make it tangible for these young brains who need to know exactly what to say and what to do. Okay. Now, for older children, we depend a little bit more on the relationship because technically they know how to get around a lot of stuff.
They do.
And
They
you
break
just,
Yep.
we still put filters in place. I think filters are good whether you're 14 or 40. I've just come to believe that most of the things I don't want a 12-year-old to see, I don't need to see either. Back to that modeling the right behaviors. If a filter is good for them, it's probably good for me. But I'm also saying things like this to a 13 or 14-year-old. It's like, honey, listen, no matter what I do, number one, you can probably find a way around it. And number two, you're probably going to bump into something that I don't want you to see. I just want you to know and then go through what you want them to know about that. Be open and honest about that. What actions do you want them to take?
Right.
And depend more on the relationship you have with them by dripping those invitations into their life to talk to you about anything and everything. Everybody watching this right now, do all of your kids, whether they're 4 or 14, know that they can land safely and softly with you, no matter what it is? And like say that to them, no matter what it is, right? And so those are some of the relational things I would lean into in the older children and just kind of looking for that balance. So it's a long-winded answer to your question,
No, I love
but
it.
it's a complicated issue that I think demands, a multitude of responses. So.
Right. And we have just a couple minutes left, and this has been great. And I probably want to bring you on because I feel like there's so much more information to unpack here. But here's the deal. And maybe it's, as a parent, like I'm putting my parent hat on, I would think, well, it's not that bad because I'm on YouTube. I don't see stuff coming on. I'm on Facebook. I don't see these porn ads. Like, I don't know what all these people like Chris McKenna are talking about. Like, I don't know why they keep saying that porn pops in here and pops in there because I don't see them. So what is the truth about that? Because, I don't. I mean, there has been times when I've Googled something and I've clicked on something, then all of a sudden there was some very erotic stuff going on and I was trying to close it and whatnot. So that has happened when I was Googling something. But when I am on YouTube and I'm on Facebook or I'm on Instagram, none of those ads are showing up. So where are these kids really seeing these things? Because when I watched Childhood 2.0, it really was showing how these things come in a flash and kids get curious and then they click on them or they click on them by accident. So where are these kids really seeing them?
Well, let me just, I know we have to finish here, but most of us as young people probably didn't get into a serious car accident when we were a teenager. But
Right.
that doesn't mean that we stopped teaching teenagers how to be prepared for a serious car accident through a long process of training. So I would just say the risks are great enough that whether it's happened to you or not, we prepare our children to deal with those risks. So we could, in another episode, go through some of the doorways that are surprising, right? That kids do find some of this. But regardless of the frequency, let's make sure they're ready to know what to do when it happens.
I love it. I love it. So, Chris, I just want to thank you so much for being on my show. And we will have a Protect Young Eyes episode 2, I'm sure, because there's so much I feel like we need to unpack more. And I'm sure I'm going to get lots of questions that I'll bring to you, and then we'll come back and continue this conversation. Again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. If you are finding value in the conversation here on our show, please join our Redefine Parenting group on Facebook for even more tips and conversation. Do someone you know a favor and share my group with them as well, so they too can hear what they need to in order for them to feel supported in their parenting journey. There's also my QR code to get my book, my free ebook called Teach Your Children That They're Enough. Please get it today. It's a great book, short read, and it will help you help your child build their self-worth and self-esteem. The show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Network. Please check out www.spanglishworld.ca for all your news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. That was so great.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Normally she doesn't bring us back. This is great. She brought us back. Oh, I think, are we still live?
Yeah. I don't know. Are we?
I guess we are. I guess we're still live. Oh,
We're
no.
still talking. Okay.
I don't know what she did, but it's still live. So I will get up with you through email. And
okay. We'll figure out how to do this again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris.
Hey, take care. Bye-bye.